you are here, and I've been thinking about this series now for a little while. Finally get to start it. We're going to call it Rhythms of the Soul. Yes, it will be a shortened series because we have Lent coming up here in the very near future. What I wanted to talk about in the month of February were spiritual practices. So this is called Rhythms of the Soul, an exploration of spiritual practices. And the first spiritual practice that I want to talk about in this series is the Bible. Now, why did I start here? The reason why is I have never experienced this before as a pastor in all my years of pastoring. The amount of excitement that there is within this particular group for reading the Bible. And that has shown up in the Matthew Bible study and the amount of people that have just said, I want to participate and be a part of a Bible study. But then I was hearing from other people too that they were either getting back into the Bible where they wanted to make it more of an intentional rhythm in their life, or they just wanted to be even more focused on reading the Bible. I had a few people actually tell me they were going through the Bible in a year this year. And with all the excitement about reading the Bible, I said, why don't we do a sermon on the Bible? Because reading the Bible it can be confusing, it can be really tricky. Sometimes the Bible gets really wonky, and for that reason, I hear people tend to stay away from it because it's like, well, I don't understand it. There's some really weird things in it. There's these stories that are, honestly, thousands of years old, and you read them, and you're like, what in the world does this have to do with me living in 2025? I read this story, it sounds so far out there. Or what about the book of Leviticus? Do we have to make any more mention of Leviticus? Because you read all these laws and rituals, and you're like, I don't really have to worry about boiling this in goat's milk or anything like that. Why would I possibly want to read through Leviticus? So the Bible is a very weird, strange, mysterious, sometimes hard to understand book. And I want to talk about the Bible because, again, the amount of excitement that you have all expressed to me is inspiring. It's encouraging. And what I want to do this morning is I want to just offer a few tools for helping us all read the Bible in, should we say, an authentic, a transformative, life-giving way, because my guess is your excitement for reading the Bible comes because you want your life to be transformed. You want to have an experience with the Spirit. You want to hear about how God has been at work in the world for thousands of years and how God is still at work in the world and in your life today. So when I think about reading the Bible, I start with this question, well, why do we read the Bible? When I think about all the excitement that there is within this group for reading the Bible, why is the excitement there? And I came up with two reasons, I think, of why we read the Bible. The first, it's for information. Because we want to know the story of God. We read the Bible because we want to know the tradition that we're a part of. My guess is for many of you, for most of you, you're here this morning, you're part of Awaken because you feel that you're a part of the Christian tradition. And that's why you're here. And so you read the Bible in order to understand the tradition that you are a part of. What has led to this moment in history? What has led to the tradition and where it happens to be today? You're reading the Bible because you want to understand the roots of where we as a tradition have been. And so you read these stories, you read how God has been working in order to understand where you and all of us part of the Christian tradition find ourselves today. So one of the reasons why you read the Bible is because you want information. You want to know, oh, that's how we got this. Oh, now I'm reading this story. Now I understand why we do this ritual. Now I understand why I do this or why we do this thing together. And the second reason for reading the Bible is because transformation. You read the Bible because you want to be challenged. And the Bible isn't an easy read. We can breeze through it sometimes. We can make it an easy read. And honestly, sometimes when we memorize verses, it's good to memorize verses. I think it's a healthy thing. Especially, I know many people, they'll put verses up, they'll write them out, they'll put them up on their car dashboard or on the bathroom mirror. They'll have it on their phone. Someone will recite a verse to them. And it's helpful, but sometimes just memorizing verses can actually keep us arm's distance from the text itself. So it's good to have those reminders, but it's also good to take it another step further. And so the Bible, we want to be challenged. We want to be changed. We want to be comforted. We want to hear about how God has brought comfort, how God has shown power in the past, how God has shown up in people's lives in the past, in the hope that God will show up in our lives in a similar way. That God has birthed new hope in people's lives for thousands of years, that that's who God is. God is a God of hope. And if millions of people for thousands of years have experienced the hope and the power of God, well, I think that brings some comfort. It does bring some comfort to my life that, oh, wow, this is who God is. This is the God that I follow. This is the God who I want to learn more about. This is the God who can breathe hope and new life even into the worst situations that life can bring. And then we want to be encouraged as well. We hear stories of faith. We hear stories of people. We read these stories in the Bible of people who have stepped out in courage, and God met them in those moments. And so it encourages us to step out in faith, to trust, even when we don't know exactly where things are going, because that's basically story after story in the Bible, is you have these people who are willing to trust, to step into the unknown, and it inspires us to risk, to try something new, to step out, to have courage, and to believe that God will meet us in those moments of uncertainty, those moments of risk. We read the Bible because we want to learn how to recognize the Spirit in our own lives. As we read the Bible, we see how the Spirit has shown up in other people's lives. And the more we become aware of these stories and how God has shown up in the past, the more we're then able to recognize how the Spirit shows up in our lives. So we read the Bible, 2 reasons. 1 was what? Information. 2 is what? Sorry, there was more transformation. I think it's because I left the slide on the screen for you. Yeah, I got you guys all figured out. Now, one of my friends, he's a pastor. He's like a mentor to me, probably about 20, 30 years older. And he always reminds me of this. He says that there's one scholar, I forget who the scholar is, but he said that during the Reformation, when the Bible started being put into normal people's hands, so not just clergy, not just the pastors, because before this, it was really just the pastors who read the book and then told you all what to think and do and believe. But then now individual people started getting the Bible. And there's one scholar who says that was the best and the worst thing that ever could have happened. The best thing, because now you have your own pocket Bible, or most of you probably have it on your phone, and you can take the Bible out and you can read it individually. And that's a really, really good thing. That's something that honestly in the Christian tradition, the Judeo-Christian tradition that we're a part of, that has only been in existence for a very, very small percentage of the tradition. So the fact that you have your own Bible and that you can read it by yourself in your own room whenever you want to, that hasn't existed for a very long period of time. Very, very small percentage in the whole amount of the tradition. So it's a really good thing that you can read your Bible, but it's also a dangerous thing as well, because we can take things and we can get off track with certain parts of the Bible. People have used the Bible, in case you've never seen this before, people can use the Bible in order to promote all sorts of bad beliefs and ways of living and ways of treating other people. I know you've never seen this before. You've never heard about people who use the Bible as a weapon for others, against others. So it's a really, really good thing that you can read the Bible, but it's also a very dangerous thing, because now you're on your own interpreting what it means and then how you subsequently now treat other people. So we have to be really, really careful when we read the Bible. We have to be humble when we read the Bible. And I would argue, while it's good for us to read the Bible as individuals, I think it's also good, I think the two go hand in hand, to read the Bible in a group with other people. That's why I think the Bible study is so important, because it's not just you alone in your closet saying, oh, this is what God told me to think, and so, yeah, this is exactly what it's saying. Good to go. I had a seminary professor. He would always say this, my Hebrew professor: the Bible can't mean today what it never meant when it was originally written. I love this truth. He would constantly remind us again and again, because sometimes we pull the Bible out of its ancient context and we make it fit our modern constructs. But what his argument was is that you can't do that. In order to understand what the Bible means for us today and how to interpret it, we have to understand what it meant when it was originally written and why it was originally written. So we need to do some digging. Whenever we read the Bible, we need to do a little work. Sometimes you need some more resources or tools while you're reading the Bible. And so what I want to do today is I want to offer some of those tools. I want to give you 2 questions to ask whenever you're reading a certain portion of Scripture, and then I want to give you a practice to do as well. So, first question is this. Whenever you come across something in the Bible, whatever it happens to be, you ask yourself this question: what is the story that this particular story, passage, or verse is contained within? So you read a story in the Bible, you read a verse, you read a couple of verses together, and you ask yourself, okay, what's the larger story that this is a part of? What's the larger thing that's happening here in this story? Because you can't just pull something right out of its context and say this is what it means. You need to understand the larger picture that's being communicated in the Bible. Let me give you a few examples. 2 Samuel 24, verse 1. Again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, "Go and take a census of Israel and Judah." What's happening here? God is what? God is angry. Because God is angry, what does he incite David to do? Take a census. Okay. Now, this is 2 Samuel chapter 24. If we know how the Bible is written, the Bible in the Old Testament has 2 different histories, 2 different ways of telling history. We have the first way right here in 2 Samuel. Then we come to Chronicles. So we have Samuel and Kings, which is a collection. And then we have Chronicles, which tells the same history of the Bible, but in a little different way. So watch this. Same story. Here's how Chronicles tells it. 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take a census of Israel. Same story, 2 different interpretations as to why this census was taken. Are you confused yet? So who incited David to take a census? Is it God? Is it Satan? Chances are, when you ask yourself this question, you're like, well, that's a pretty big question. That's a pretty important question to get right if you're reading the Bible, is it not? Big difference here. And yet, Samuel tells us it's God. Chronicles tells us it's Satan. How in the world could these 2 things be in the same Bible? Isn't this contradictory? What in the world is going on? Remember, what was that first question we have to ask ourselves? What's the context? What's the larger story that's happening? This is why it's very, very important to have tools and resources to understand what you are reading in the Bible. Here's the larger story for Samuel and Kings. Remember, Samuel, Kings, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, they are a collection. They are telling history in a very particular way. Those books were written sometime around the 6th century during the exile. Now, the exile was one of the darkest moments of Israelite history. Foreign nations came in, basically destroyed Israel, and they deported all the people living there to the foreign nation. So, at this moment in history, Israel is trying to remember their past. But remember, if they have been exiled, if they have been invaded and taken over and conquered by a foreign nation, their way of understanding things would be, God is angry at us. We messed up. We lost the plot. So they were telling their story, their history, in a very particular way based on their present experience. So to them, it was, well, God initiated this because God was angry with us for how we had been living, for us neglecting the poor, for us not creating a just society. Obviously, it's our fault for the misfortune. This is why God has abandoned us. This is why we have got into this mess. Now, so you come across this. Now, for Chronicles was written much later in the history. Chronicles was written as the exiles were returning to Israel. A very, very different moment in history. Think about this. You're exiled. Your emotions are probably where? Down here. God's angry with us. But now you're returning to your homeland after who knows how many years. Where are your emotions at this point? You're up here. You're filled with excitement, with hope, with anticipation, but you're asking a whole host of other questions. What you're asking is, are we still God's people? Is God still with us? The promises that God had made to our ancestors, are they still relevant for us today? So Chronicles, in a sense, they whitewash Israel's history. David's adultery, you find none of it in Chronicles. That's in Samuel, Kings. Again, because they were trying to answer the question, how did we get into this mess? Well, look at what our leaders are doing. So that's why in Samuel, Kings, you'll hear all the talk about the evil kings. It's the kings who led us in this direction. Chronicles now is asking a whole set of different questions. Are we still God's people? Is God still with us? And so they adapt the story of the census in order to show everyone that they're writing their new history to, yes, God never abandoned us. It wasn't God who incited the census. It was Satan who incited the census. Two very different ways of looking at history based off the current circumstances that the writers of Scripture found themselves in. When you read the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, you realize the Bible layout, it's not chronological. If it were, you'd have Chronicles basically at the end of the Old Testament. And so the way in which the Bible is laid out, sometimes it's really not the most helpful way in which it's laid out, because you think that you're just reading at one point here and then it just chronologically continues, but it doesn't really work that way. And so having a resource or a tool to help you understand the chronology of when the Bible was written, very, very helpful for understanding the story. Now, let's go to question number 2. Second question to ask. What is the genre that I am reading? The Bible is not a book of simply one genre. I liken the Bible to a library. So within the Bible, you will find poems, you'll find songs, genealogies, parables, you'll find gospel, which is a particular genre, you'll find historical narrative, proverbs, pithy wisdom statements, you'll find epistles or letters, there's law, there's prophecy, everyone's favorite, apocalyptic literature. The Bible is a library. Let's just say you went to your local Barnes & Noble and you were looking for a book for parenting advice. Is this the book that you would buy? No, we all know this. If you were looking for a book on the Cold War, is this the book that you would buy? What about a book on nutrition? Modern economic history of Africa will teach me what to eat for breakfast. No, we all know that genre is very specific based off of the information that we are looking for. When we read the Bible, it's very, very important to understand what genre we are reading because it's all mixed in there together. Psalm 91, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare, from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Which raises two questions. Does God have feathers? Does God have wings? This is a poem? A song? We don't think that God has feathers when we read this because we understand what the genre is. We understand this is someone describing God in a way in which they have experienced God. It's like any song you might hear on the radio. People have metaphors and similes to understand the experience that they've had. So that's kind of an easy one. But what about when we come to something like this? Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. What genre is this? This is a poem. There's a refrain. There was evening, there was morning the first day. There was evening, there was morning the second day. There was evening, there was morning the third day. In seminary, my Hebrew professor, he actually said this was an ode. And he believed that this is a song that the Israelites might have been singing as they were wandering around in the wilderness. A song that they were singing about the God who was with them, the God who had rescued them, the God who had created and was the source of all that they were experiencing. Now, Genesis 1 as a poem versus Genesis 1 as literal truth, we can come up with some very different ways of understanding Genesis 1 depending on our correct understanding of the genre. Now, what if you don't know what the genre is? Let's take this book, Jonah. Everyone's favorite book about a whale swallowing a human. Everyone wondering, did it happen? Did it not happen? Couldn't have happened. It's crazy. But here's the ending of Jonah. The Lord said, you, Jonah, have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. Should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals? This is how Jonah ends. Now, there have been many, many arguments about this book. Is this a true story? Is this fact or is this fiction? Is this true or is this a parable? And some people have really dug their heels into defending their particular position on the book of Jonah. There's some people who say, you know what? There is no way that a whale could ever swallow a human. That's impossible. I can't suspend my belief that much. I'm going to write the entire book off. But then you have other people, they dig their heels in and they say, no, this is in the Bible. This is exactly what happened. A whale swallowed Jonah. He was spit up onto the beach, and they dig their heels in defending that position. But you want to know what happens? When you're so caught up in defending your position about whether it's true or parable, fact or fiction, you miss the invitation of the story. Here's how the story ends. What we just read. Can I have concern for these people? It ends with a question, because the book of Jonah, it's a book about forgiveness and how difficult it is to forgive others who have caused you harm. The book of Jonah is a question for all of us of, will you continue to live in your bitterness? Will you allow your desire for revenge to continue to consume you? Or will you open your heart to a new way? Will you open your heart to the way of forgiveness and allow your life to be transformed? See, when we dig our heels into, and this is true for Genesis 1 as well, I understand people see that differently, but when you dig your heels into, this is how it is, this is the only way it is, you can miss the deeper truth that's being conveyed in the story. And you can miss the transformation that the Spirit is inviting you into. Now, let's end with the practice. Whenever you read the Bible, here is the practice for you. And we'll call it yes and. Does anyone know what this practice is from? Yes, it's from improv. If you are doing any improv, if someone says something to you, you don't just end the conversation right there, because that ends the improv. So someone will tell you something, you will respond, and then you will add something else in order to keep the story going. This is the purpose of the Bible. And here's my favorite book on this. I read this probably 15 years ago. Changed my way of viewing the Bible. Seeing and Living the Script in New Ways. The Bible is Improv. Ron Mortoya. And there's this quote he has in there from a theologian. God and humanity are alternately actor and audience. Better. Life is a human, divine, interactive theater. You read the Bible, you say yes and. You read the Bible, it doesn't stop with you. It's not just so that you can collect more information. Again, that's a part of why we read the Bible. But we read the Bible to inspire us to go and live in a particular way. So as we read the Bible, what we're doing is we are immersing ourselves in the story of God so that we can know the rhythms. We can know the ways of God. At Awaken, our vision is to create followers of Jesus. So we read the Bible in order to understand who Jesus was, how Jesus lived, how Jesus is teaching us to live today. And we don't keep those truths up here in our head as good things to memorize. We don't just memorize the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes and say, well, those are great things to know intellectually. But rather, we find ways to then go and embody those truths. Yes, and the purpose of reading the Bible is so that then we can carry the story of God forward with our lives. We read about a God of forgiveness. We read about Jesus, who showed mercy, compassion for every single person that he came across, so that then we can go live in the same way, so we can go and do likewise. We look at the life of Jesus so that then we can go and show compassion, love, mercy, forgiveness to others. That's the transformative piece of the Bible. The Bible as improv. Yes, but it doesn't stop with me. I am now to carry this way of living forward so that others can experience the goodness, the love, and the grace of God. So those are a few thoughts on the Bible. I was going to open up for questions, but we're not going to do that because my guess is, we're at 11:02. But anyway, any questions, please send me an email. Would love to help. If there's any resources or tools I can help you with in your pursuit of reading the Bible this year, would love to help you with that. So please send me an email if there is anything. We do have our Matthew Bible study this Thursday evening, so hopefully you can join us for that one. I have resources. I have a study book available. We have that in the back, so if anyone would like a copy of it, we can provide that for you. And my hope is that you will take the Bible and that you will dive into it this year, as many of you have been doing, and that it will change you. It will challenge you. It will comfort, encourage. It will inspire you to carry forward the way of Jesus.